Join. Hello. Hello? Hello? Who joined us? I can't see. Hello? Hello? There we are. Sonia, hello. Sonia? Hello? Hello? Sonia, can you hear me? Sonia?
Hello?
Hello, Sonia. Can you hear me?
Can I actually be heard?
I hear you. Do you hear me?
Yo.
Hey.
How's it going?
All right. How are you? Okay. You got so that link I posted helped?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Sonia is there somewhere, but for some reason she can't hear me. Sonia, can you hear David? Can you? She's punching buttons like really viciously. Can you hear it?
Yeah, I can hear the buttons.
Yeah. I'm messaging her. I heard her say hello, and then now she's gone.
Oh.
Okay. So I've done this, I don't know, this is like the most counterintuitive platform in
Yeah, it is.
existence. And I've done it a couple times before. And the most recently, just about a month ago, because I've had tech problems with my other recording method that I used before. So I think I've got it. It says it's recording.
That's cool. What did you use before?
And usually for several years since I started, I've been using Skype, and I use a Skype recording app, and that's worked reasonably well. I've had a couple problems with that app, and of course Skype is buggy as hell. But right before, I think in early December, I tried recording C.M. Muller and Daniel Brown for a show about NightScript. And when I opened up the audio files, only my track was on them, not their track.
Oh, wow.
And that's not, I mean, I've been using this program. I thought I'd figure out everything that could go wrong with it. And it did that. And I was really frustrated. I tried others. I mean, there are other apps to do that Skype recording, but either they only work with Mac or they will only record like up to 3 people. So I just took a little break because I was so discouraged. I mean, I could outline the history of my discouragements with this podcast, but
Yeah, wow.
I've come close to quitting many times. The old host was a real hassle too. The new host, this is Horace, great. I mean, they're very supportive and have good tech advice when I need it. But David, you're muted.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've just been I've been unmuting and talking. So
okay, that's good.
I have some dogs, so I'm hoping they're not going to bark.
That's not a big deal. I find that my listeners don't mind dogs and cat noises.
Oh, okay.
Where I live, I have trains.
Oh wow.
And I'm so accustomed to them, I hardly notice them anymore.
Oh, hello?
Hey, there you are, Sonia.
This is Helen.
Oh, Helen. Okay, sorry. Sonia has been in the background for about 5 minutes pushing buttons wildly. We can hear her, but she can't hear us. Okay, welcome.
Hi, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Okay, if I'd had the window open, I would have seen your face. Sorry. So Sonia is the green square. I don't know if you see anything from me.
Let me pull it up again. I see just I don't see a video. I just see actually I don't know that I see. No, I just see the word Scott.
Okay, that's
you have
good.
no image. Yeah. You are just
I'm a
Scott.
I'm a void, a black void. Just the logos, the logos in the darkness. Helen, do you have headphones on?
I do, yeah.
I'm hearing feedback somewhere. Okay, maybe it was just me. I got too close to the computer. Hello, I have headphones on. Sonia, she's trying to join us. Can you hear her? She's punching. Poor Sonia.
Well, I see, intermittently my screen turns green, which I think is Sonia.
That's her. I don't know if it's a St. Patrick's Day thing or what. Okay.
Is my volume okay? Because
yeah, you're great. You sound
okay,
great.
perfect.
Hello?
Because
hey, Sonia. Sonia. Okay, I'm going to go back to the Facebook so I can communicate.
I'm seeing David doing something.
Oh, sorry. I'm just typing and stuff.
Ah, there you are.
Sonia, can you hear us? And she was supposed to be the Google Hangouts Pro.
She says that she can't hear us at all either. Yeah. I'm just going to plug in a slightly better microphone onto mine and see if that...
always some bug with this thing, but
All right. Is this microphone any better or any worse?
sounds the same, but it's good. Your volume is clear and good.
Okay. People can hear me?
Sonia?
Yes.
Hello? Oh,
Briefly, we could hear you.
yeah, we're just waiting for Stephen. No, and Sonia to actually appear.
Okay.
Hello?
Do I look like I'm logged into the correct call, which people are part of? I can
Yes.
see something saying that I am. What I can't hear is anyone else on the other end,
You can't hear us.
which is a bit worrisome.
Lordy, lordy.
I can't hear anyone else, and I'm not sure why.
Have you got... What did I just do?
This is going to cause some problems with the entire concept of a two-way conversation, though.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello.
I am using headphones. All right. Hold on. Can you still hear me if I haven't got the headphones plugged in?
Yep, we can
hear
still hear you.
Hi, Stephen.
Yeah. Hello.
We're just... Everybody's on, but Sonia is having a one-way conversation. We hear her, but she can't hear us.
All right.
Sonia? Sonia? She jinxed herself by referencing last night her experience with Google Hangouts. I think that's her punching the buttons desperately.
Oh yeah.
It's like we can... It's horrible. We can hear her desperate. Thank God she's like not trapped in like some room that's filling with water and spikes are closing in, because we're totally helpless to aid her. Sonia.
Hey,
Sonia? Sonia?
does this make a difference?
We hear you.
Do you hear us?
Doesn't sound like it.
Whoa, what was that? Sonia? Let me see if there's anything I can do on this end. Uh-oh.
What?
What did I do?
You muted her for a moment, but I think it got undone. Maybe.
I just muted her, see if I could unmute her. I figured mute
Yeah.
and unmute, but now I can't unmute her.
Huh.
Uh-oh. That didn't help. Sonia. Let me hear on the messenger. Send her a new invite. Sonia. Try that. Sorry, everybody. Okay. I'm sending a new invite. Let's see if that works. Although it seems to be something technical, physical.
Yeah.
Nobody else had any trouble?
No, it's working great for me.
Yeah, it's all right for me.
I had trouble joining until I got the link. The link worked for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know you could do it that way, so it's good to know in the future. I'm glad you thought of that.
Yeah. You can also schedule events through Google Plus and like set up Hangouts ahead of time.
Yeah, actually, I set this one up there, I think. It's really weird. The way you have to like link that you have to work simultaneously from Google and YouTube, and they keep changing it.
Yeah.
So from the time I did it a couple of years ago, it was completely different. And so if you try to go to online tutorials, they show you like, there she's back on. Sonia, can you hear us? Sonia. So they show you like, go to this setting, and it's stuff that's not there anymore.
Huh.
Yeah, they changed it a couple years ago. It used to be just in Google. Now it's like Google and YouTube.
Right.
Huh. So Scott, I guess there's a record function in here that you're using?
Yeah, it just automatically is broadcasting to YouTube.
Oh wow.
It seems to be saying it's doing that.
Yeah.
But
it's not just broadcasting, it's also creating a movie file of some sort.
Yeah, like you could probably see it.
Okay.
I think it's actually live.
Neat.
Maybe I could double check that by going to YouTube and looking at my channel and creating a horrible feedback loop.
Can any of you hear me or the noises I am making with my computer?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hear you, Sonia. We hear you. We hear your noises. Yeah, I just checked it on YouTube, and I heard exactly me saying I could create a horrible feedback loop. It's exactly what played. So there's apparently a short delay.
Right.
Poor Sonia.
Wait, can people listen to us right now? Or it's...
Yeah, well, nobody is. I mean, they'd have to be following my channel, which I don't think anybody does, because there's only there's like an old episode of The Utter Dark on it, and then there's a slideshow for that presentation I gave at Necronomicon. So yeah, theoretically, if somebody got on, they'd hear us. But what I'll do is I'll download this audio when we're done. All this part, of the desperate attempt to get Sonia on, I'll just trim that audio. I'll edit it in Audition. I'll take that part off, clean up anything else, and so I'll trim the ends, whatever's on the end, the beginning that we don't need, and I'll clean up anything else. Maybe somebody said something that they said, "Oh, could we take that out?"
Yeah.
And then that's pretty rare, but any weird noises, if the air raid siren goes off,
Yeah.
Whatever. Sonia. I hate to go on without her, but at some point we'll have to.
Yeah.
She can hear the test sound just fine, which is weird.
Yeah. Sonia, where are you? Sonia? Sorry, everybody. Actually, with
No
5
worries.
people here, it's pretty amazing. That's the only problem we're having.
Yeah.
So Helen, I want to thank you for, not that you did it for us, but that wonderful essay you wrote. It's just a perfect starting point.
Oh, well, I'm glad you like it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it touched on a lot of themes I think a lot of people are talking about, but you summed a lot of key points up really eloquently, and then you took them to another level.
I assume people can still hear me, even though I can't hear them.
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah.
But you can't hear us, so.
Is it worth somebody trying a one-on-one with Sonia to see if we can?
Yeah.
Notification noises are very loud.
You hear us?
Darn, I got excited.
Yeah, me too.
It's
Let's
clicking
see, how
noises
do I
are my cat clawing at the screen, by the way. He said hello.
Oh,
He's a
okay.
telepath.
I could, let me see if I can set up a new, I don't think I could do 2 events at the same time. But let me see if I can do one with Sonia to test. No, you know, if I do, I know it will disconnect this one. Can't do that.
I could try contacting her. I could try hanging up from this, contacting her, because I can always
Okay.
get back in.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Helen. You probably can't hear us now. Yeah, this whole thing is on YouTube.
Neat.
Yeah, if I get the hang of this better, I think when we were at Necronomicon, originally the idea was to actually broadcast it live.
Mm-hmm.
But they're just there were too many, and there's basically no. The Necronomicon folks have pretty much no tech idea what they're doing, other than having working microphones.
Yeah.
What the? Okay, what does she say? All right. Is that the email she sent us? So right now I'm calling this. I'll probably say this again in the intro, but I'm calling this the 2018 Roundtable. The first year I did it, and we've always called it State of the Weird. The first time I did it was Laird and Justin Steele and me, and I think I called that the 2015 2016 one or something. So one year I did like 2 years combined, and then the next year I used the year date for the year that had just finished. So this year I'm going to do it for I want to keep it completely screwed up because it's hopeless already. You know what I mean? And I think that's appropriate for weird fiction, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, if anybody looked at the previous years and found that confusing, it is confusing, and I'm just going to keep it that way.
Hello? Does this make a difference one-on-one?
We hear you, Sonia.
Hello.
I think you, Sonia. I think you joined us instead of Helen.
You also might be in 2 calls.
Whoop. Ah, geez. All right. Well, I can still hear the test sound, but if people are speaking, I still can't hear it.
Sonia, Sonia, Sonia.
I don't understand the hang up.
She's very frustrated, and we're just sad.
Oh, yeah.
This is the sort of thing that usually happens with Skype.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
And then at some point you push a button,
Yeah.
something that you've already done like 5 times, and it works.
Yeah.
All right, I'm back, but I didn't have any luck.
Yeah. Sonia? She should probably try rebooting. I don't know if that works for. That's like this random thing. Although that actually helps with my Skype recording app when I do that. Sometimes it goes off and it won't reconnect to Skype, and I have to reboot. Okay, she's gonna log out, come back. We'll try that. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
That's no problem.
Do you know where she is? Is she in Massachusetts?
Yeah, I think she's on the East Coast.
Okay, so I'm also in Massachusetts.
One thing to keep in mind, actually, while we're prepping is, although actually I'm not hearing anything, so don't like touch your microphone or type on the keyboard while we're talking. Especially since using Google Hangouts, everybody will be on the same. It'll record in stereo, but everyone will be on the same audio track. So I can't edit different voices separately.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm doing a one-on-one interview using Skype, I'll be on the left track, and say if I'm talking to Steven, then you would be on the right track, and I can separate the tracks and edit noise and mistakes separately, but I can't do it using the Google Hangouts.
Gotcha.
So although I'm not hearing, I'm hearing very, very little noise from any of you, other than Sonia pounding on the computer or her cat or whatever it is. Still, one of the favorite listener favorite episodes is the one, very early one, where I interviewed Jayaprakash Satyamurthy in Bangalore, and he was, I don't know if he still does, but he and his wife were running out of their home a shelter for abandoned and abused animals, and I guess they made a valiant effort to keep the animals away from the computer or like in the next room during the course of the interview, but there were still dog and cat noises. I think a parrot flew through at one point. but I got a lot of positive. Nobody complained. People, the crowd that we're playing to here. Everybody loves cats and dogs, and probably parrots too. I like parrots best of all, actually. But yeah, that was. I actually have thought about just including like a animal soundtrack in the back. And I was telling David before, where I live now in California. Sonia? She's definitely going in and out, which means whatever.
Settings, test sound, that sort of thing works fine.
Yeah. Sounds
a bit staticky because it's coming through my tiny, tinny computer speakers now.
Sonia? She might. The one thing she might do is listen to the YouTube video. Oh, I think that'll create some insane feedback thing, but
Yeah, I think there's also a delay on the YouTube video.
yeah. But let's see. Send her the link for that. What's a delay? I don't think anybody cares if we fucking swear. Okay, let's see if... I mean, we could squeeze her in somehow that way. I don't know. Maybe. How frustrating. Poor Sonia. Sonia? Sonia? Sonia, Sonia. Sonia? There, something just happened, Sonia. Because your icon changed. Have you seen that?
Yeah, it did. I think it changed when she left to reboot to that same icon.
Oh, she's messaging us now. Yeah, Sonia, we're getting your messages. How frustrating. Sonia? All right, I'll give it a few more minutes, and I guess we'll have to go forward without her if we can't get her. I don't know what else
Yeah.
I don't really have any other control.
I'll probably be needing a split about 12:45. I could maybe go till 1.
Yeah, I want to get off by 1 because I actually have an assignment I need to do. So yeah, I didn't plan to go later than that.
Yeah.
So that's why I say we'll have to, one way or another, we'll have to start soon.
Yeah.
And I appreciate everyone's time and their insight. Sonia, please be there. Sonia. Every time something changes, I think that's it.
Well, you got a face now, Scott.
It's an old one.
I think my avatar or whatever it is from like 10 years ago, probably. I didn't even know I still had that in there.
No, little cat.
Sonia. The worst is that we can hear her. Such a nice voice too. make up for my gruffness. Sonia, Sonia, Sonia. Sonia, 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 Sonia. Sonia? Hello?
That's the test sound from Google Hangouts.
No. Sonia? Hello, hello, Sonia? Sonia? I'd say to keep have her keep trying, but we'll get all the noise.
Oh, yeah.
All right, I guess we're gonna have to go ahead.
All right.
All right, let me.
I think you could use Google Hangouts on a mobile phone. That might be an option.
Yeah, that's actually good. Let's try that. Sonia, Sonia, poor Sonia. Oh. Okay, I'm gonna mute her. Okay. All right, I guess we'll have to continue. That's really frustrating. Sorry, everybody.
That's all right.
Okay, everybody's here now. David, Helen?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm here too.
Okay, great. All right, so what we'll do, I'll do a quick intro for the program, and then I'll ask you all to interview yourselves. We'll just go with, I guess, in the order on the screen. So it'd be David, Helen, and then Stephen.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Cool.
And then you can,
Yep.
you can include the bio elements that you prefer. Okay. Welcome to a special episode of The Outer Dark. This is our third annual State of the Weird Roundtable. And we're calling this one the State of the Weird Roundtable for 2018, which I think is probably confusing, and it's even confusing to me because the first year when it was Justin Steele and Laird Barron and myself, I think we called it 2015, or maybe we called it 2015, 2016, then the next year we did 2016, and now, so it's a question of whether we are covering the year that's passed and the year that's coming, or the year that's passed or the year that's coming, and we're just doing it now. It's 2018, so that's what we're calling it. So if you're confused, that's because it's the weird. So joining me today for the 2018 State of the Weird Roundtable are David Davis, Helen Marshall, and Stephen Graham Jones. And I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves. For those of you who probably don't know all of it already, most of you probably do. So David, tell us about your major role in the weird.
Yeah, so I'm David Davis. I'm the managing editor of Weird Fiction Review. It's an online website dedicated to weird fiction. It was founded, I think, in 2012 by Jeff Vandermeer and Ann Vandermeer. And I've been editing it since 2014. And I also dabble with translating fiction. I'm translating some stories right now by Franz Hellens.
I didn't know. So you're translating from what, German?
French.
French. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, there's actually one story online already. The double. It's on Weird Fiction Review.
Oh, okay. I got to check that out. Thank you.
Yeah.
Not to interrupt your bio, but that's exciting.
Yeah, that's pretty much my bio. The story is really good. It's about a doppelganger. So if you like the theme of doubles and doppelgangers in weird fiction, you should check it out.
Awesome. Okay, Helen?
I'm Helen Marshall. I'm a senior lecturer at Anglia Ruskin University, and where I also am the general director for the Center for Science Fiction and Fantasy. But I've also edited the Year's Best Weird Fiction Volume 4, which covered short fiction from 2016. So I suppose in some ways I'm feeling slightly out of sync. And I wrote two collections. Yeah, I hope so.
Sorry.
I wrote two collections of short stories, Hairside, Fleshside, and Gifts for the One Who Comes After. And I've got a weird fiction novel coming out in early 2019 called Everything Born.
Ooh, and we had a nice interview with you here a couple of years ago about your two collections.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, when the novel comes out, we'll have to do a new interview and then re-up the whole episode.
That would be really lovely.
Yeah, that'd be great. And you wrote a wonderful essay as an introduction for the Year's Best Weird Fiction called The State of the Weird, which conveniently uses the same title we've been using for this. So that really works out nicely. And I will definitely link to that with this episode. And I urge all listeners to read that because it's online, once again, conveniently at the Weird Fiction Review online. So thank you, David, for that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then finally, Stephen Graham Jones, who probably needs no introduction, but we'd like to hear one anyway.
Hey, I'm Stephen Graham Jones. I write mostly horror, a little bit of science fiction, a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of what gets called literary, and occasionally kind of trespass over into the weird. I feel it's never on purpose, but sometimes I look around and it's all weird, and I realize I'm in territory that I didn't mean to go into, and it's fun.
The call of the weird.
Yeah, man.
I think, here, let's start with this question then, because we'll say weird out of it. Do you think that kind of ignoring or paying little heed to genre labels can lead to the weird?
Asking me or all of us?
Well, you can start.
Yeah, I think it definitely can. You know, I always know if I'm writing horror or science fiction or fantasy, but I don't always know if I'm writing horror or weird. And the indicator to me that I'm writing something weird is when I realize that I don't really know what this antagonistic force is. And then I realize that this is going to be a story about the protagonists, I don't know, how little they matter to the world, I guess. It's not going to be about do they survive. It's going to be a bigger fear about existence.
Nice. Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I find that I didn't come to writing with a clear sense of what the weird is. And to be fair, I'm not entirely sure that I have a full sense of what the weird is now, because I do think it shifts from time to time. And I was drawing on a variety of different sources, some of which were science fiction and fantasy and horror, but others were surrealism and absurdism. And I was just writing stories that really amused me and entertained me. And I was waiting for other people to tell me what they were. And one of the labels that came back is the weird, though I think some of my stories might be weird, but I'm not sure that all of them fit within that. I think it's a murky territory, and it can be sometimes difficult to write explicitly within the weird. Sometimes you kind of glance off of it.
You know, that's really interesting because, you know, having read both your collections, I would agree that, I mean, definitely there are some stories that you write that where the term weird applies readily. There are others that seem to step in and out of that territory, or at least have elements, and there are others that seem more like horror or fantasy or something else. So, and I think that's true of a lot of writers who, I think there are very few writers who are working in the weird, you know, entirely, you know, and explicitly, but a lot of writers who are moving in and out of it.
Yeah, I think as a category, it's really interesting because as the label has become attached to more and more works right now. So I would say that there's more writers who identify themselves as writing the weird, but I found when I've gone on panels like this in the past, actually, everybody tends to sit back and say, I don't really know what the weird is, and I'm not really sure if that's what I do.
Yeah, we get that a lot. In fact, we just had this panel that was done in New York, the Nighttime Logic series that Daniel Brown does, and it was for Nightscript magazine, which doesn't identify, you know, C.M. Miller doesn't identify that as a weird fiction magazine. I think he called it strange or uncanny. We had a whole discussion about that. But the panelists who all had stories in the magazine, or the anthology, I should say, all of them were not completely sure, you know, how they ended up in the weird. And we've hosted more than one panel on the Outer Dark where it was part of the discussion. And I think that's fair. I mean, I think what I've seen, and David, I think you could really speak to this. What I have seen since in the last 10 years, particularly, I mean, obviously we had the rise of the quote unquote new weird, right? And that was controversial for some people. I think it pushed some people's buttons, but along with that and following that, we had emergence of weird as, is it a genre? Is it a mode? Is it a category? I don't think even that is agreed on. And I've decided, I think that's good that we don't have agreement on it. But
Yeah.
there are more and more, I'll say one more thing and then turn to you. You see more and more magazines, though, editors saying, you know, we take horror, science fiction, weird. And that's created a market. So take it away, David.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been working in the weird for a few years now, and I still am sort of not sure how to define it. But what I really liked about Helen's intro was she sort of asked the question. I think she was channeling Harrison. She asked the question, you know, should we define the weird? I think that's a really good question to ask as well.
I agree. And a few years ago, there was a panel at World Horror. Stephen and I were both on it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and some people got really bent out of shape about the idea of defining the weird. And at that point, I confess I was still looking to, you know, for a definition. And it was kind of after that panel, I'm not calling him out, but Nathan Ballingrud really seemed uncomfortable with it. And Molly Tanzer was on there too, and she had some discomfort with the idea of defining the weird, or certainly, and neither of them are writers. They're good examples of writers I would say certainly work in the weird, but are not weird writers. You know, they've both written material that's definitely weird, but that's not, I wouldn't even say it's the bulk of their material. And they can write beautifully in that mode or whatever. But there was definitely some pushback against the idea of defining the weird. And not long after that, I had some conversations with Michael Kelly, and it really made me, you know, at that point, I just discarded all notion of seeking a definition of the weird, and have been happier for it.
Yeah, I almost worry, like, with defining the weird, that it becomes sort of a label used to sort of sell fiction. And I think that's what happened with New Wave as well, New Wave science fiction. And
yeah. And certainly there are people who do it. Go ahead, Helen.
I think that there's also a danger that if the weird, much like horror, generates some of its effect off of a certain emotion, that once you start replicating the tropes because they become conventional, then it stops generating that emotion. So I think that there is a kind of danger in over marketing and possibly overproducing the weird.
I agree. And you know, one thing that's doing this show and the conversations I have with writers, and I would say again, very few of the writers I interview are people who are working strictly in the weird or defining themselves in that way. None that I can think of, really. But one thing that we're talking about more and more is that the weird itself is changing as the world is changing in weird and rapid ways. And you touched a lot on this in your essay, your intro for Year's Best Weird Fiction, Helen. I mean, the more you try to write the weird, it gets harder as the world itself gets weirder.
Yeah, I came to, so I suppose just to catch people up quickly, I came to the process of editing the year's best weird fiction. I was looking at material that was being produced in 2016, as I was saying, and that was encompassing the period as well in which the UK, where I live, went through the vote to leave the EU. So we had our referendum, and that kicked up a lot of issues, and then followed by Donald Trump in the States, both of which have had this destabilizing effect, I suppose, on what people consider to be the new normal. I mean, that term, the new normal, gets thrown around an awful lot now. So I was quite interested in the way that that sense of destabilization intersects with reading about the weird, or the way in which we even come to grapple with what the weird is. If one level of the weird might be taking a look at a sort of the difference, disparity between a surface level reality and the idea that there's something underneath it that comes burbling out from time to time.
Yeah, it's funny to use the term the new normal, because the new normal is anything but normal.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if weird always has to be like 25% weirder than, you know, what we take to be reality. Then that seems like an escalation game that's going to explode pretty quickly.
I feel like we're there. Yeah, I feel like it's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
I don't have a functioning weirdometer at this point.
Yeah. But like in a community of people who are all real liberals, say they're all hippies, then the way their kids are going to rebel is by wearing suits and being business majors, you know. So I wonder if weird will have to put on a suit, you know, if reality gets weird enough, that weird fiction will then be weird by being what used to be called normal, you know.
That's the thing. I mean, I remember years ago in the 80s when I was a DJ and I was emceeing a Black Flag show, and I had done them like a previous tour, and then so I was in the dressing room, and Henry, who was still pretty skinny then, it was before he got all buffed up, right? So he was doing yoga and eating raisins, you know, and he wasn't like this. And he had long hair too. And one of the other band members turned to me, and goes, "That's the," and said, "That's the product of hippie parents."
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know. That was sort of that. I mean, it's actually not, you know, not wearing a suit or anything, but
yeah.
I mean, you see Henry now, and he could, you know, for a long time, he could easily put on a suit, cover up the tattoos, and you know, go to any office.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, what Helen said about the tropes, you know, that I think once the tropes become set, I don't think they're weird anymore. You know, I think that's the thing.
I think that happens with any movement, any art movement, is that once it gets codified, then it becomes repeatable, and then it becomes a formula, and then it loses its juice, like Harrison was saying, and as Helen was excerpting him for her intro.
Well, I think it's particularly true of the weird, though, because the weird is, you know, all about resisting definition, not just as the weird, but in terms of what we write. We write stories that don't have those, you know, they don't have those pat endings.
Yeah. I almost wonder, some of like the tropes that you see today in horror, like vampires and werewolves. And I know Jones, Stephen wrote a book recently that was really good about werewolves. But I almost think that they're not weird anymore. But starting out, were those weird at one time?
I think they could be. What do folks think about that?
Part of my background is as I did my PhD in medieval literature, and one of the things I find is going back to medieval literature is so much of it seems really weird. So either it intersects almost kind of explicitly with notions of the weird, or it just seems strange. The underlying logic of it seems very strange to us now, and yet that was the underlying logic would have been more conventional at the time. So I think that there's an interesting kind of question about how time intersects with generic tropes and how culture intersects with generic tropes. So I do feel right now that things like vampires have become kind of, if not normalized, then those tropes are really familiar to us. So they don't generate that same kind of frisson. But you can still do really interesting things with them, as Stephen did with werewolves.
Yeah, you know, for me, the weird, like, yeah, I agree. Werewolves and vampires aren't really weird or startling or anything anymore. But the weird, as I understand it, or as I like to understand it, I guess I should say, isn't about like surface characteristics or stuff that like my aunt who doesn't read would call weird. You know, it's about a story dynamic or a general way that this set of stories moves or develops or expresses itself. Because I think if we get into or if weird fiction gets into a contest of what is the most weird on the surface becomes the most weird fiction, then I think Bizarro is going to win every time. It'll be a lot more weird than weird fiction.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, when you try to explain weird to people, there's always that confusion between, I guess, stylistically weird or weird in terms of content, which Bizarro certainly has, you know, has wrapped up the market on. And there's obviously a huge overlap between, you know, Bizarro and the, I guess, the sort of thing that we're calling the weird too. I mean, lots of people move in and out of that. That was the thing that Molly brought up on that panel, you know, that we're talking about. But then there's the weird. That's why I capitalize, you know, when I write about it, I write the weird with a capital W.
I always have such a hard time remembering where the E and the I go in weird.
Even the spelling defies convention.
But I do always see it in that Weird Tales font, you know, that creepy font.
That's our semiotics right there.
Yeah.
David, so do you see, you know, you've been editing Weird Fiction Review for some years now, and what kind of shifts have you seen, you know, because you've got to look at these large scale trends?
That's a good question. I have recently seen in the past couple of years, a lot of weird fiction that deals with biology and environments. I feel like people are concerned about things like climate change and stuff like that. And perhaps, you know, Jeff Vandermeer in his Southern Reach trilogy is maybe a reflection of that. So I think that's sort of, you know, a commentary on some of people's fears, I guess. I feel like weird fiction has always been a way to deal with fears in a way. And some of the fears that we see today, maybe around politics and stuff like that, I wonder if that will manifest into some trends that we see in the next couple of years.
That's a good point. I think you're right. I mean, every art expresses the issues of its time, of course. I think horror fiction, when it deals with you know, eco stuff or political situations, it digests it in a way that processes it through. I think weird fiction doesn't do that. It doesn't process you through to a happy place. Weird fiction almost amplifies it and makes this economic whatever that's going on, it makes it worse than we thought it was, you know? Weird fiction doesn't stabilize. I think weird fiction destabilizes. I think horror is always looking to re-achieve the status quo that was messed up by this intrusion of whatever the horror is. But weird fiction is not at all concerned with that. Weird fiction is worried about making us question everything that we encounter from here on out.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is really interesting because you're right. Horror is about trying to deal with the intrusion, but weird fiction has something to do with the idea that the intrusion isn't a one-off event, that actually the real world is the thing that's been intruding through, and that's what's frightening about it.
That's terrifying. Yeah, it makes it makes horror fiction a lot more comforting than weird fiction, I think.
Do you think that conventional horror is meant, at some level, is meant to have that comforting effect?
Yeah, well, the way I understand it, it definitely is. It's horror is, I mean, it's for all its transgression and its craziness and everything. I think it's essentially the most conservative of all the genres.
I agree. Although science fiction can get pretty conservative, at least the John Campbell strain.
Yeah, yeah. It can get kind of shrieky about the future.
Yeah. There's some of you may have seen on Facebook right now, author Michael Wehunt, who's got one of the more. Sorry, I paused a little loud. Car go by. Michael Wehunt has one of the more hotly anticipated collections for 2018 coming up, but he opened up a thread on his Facebook page asking about that idea of stories that don't have pat endings, that are open-ended, because he's gotten pushback. I think he got pushback in a review from a reader, and I've talked about that on the Outer Dark repeatedly, that I find the readers who have the most trouble with weird fiction are those who are coming out of expectations of either conventional horror or conventional science fiction.
I think the trick with that is, yeah, weird fiction does tend to have more open endings, less neatly tied with a bow at the end, but at the same time, you still need to process a character through some sort of emotional arc or development. And so I think if you can ring that bell of character processing through, then that'll probably achieve the closure that the larger weird fiction story is going to deny the reader, or no, it's not gonna serve that to the reader anyways. But so I think a lot of writers, I think people can see weird fiction as an easy out if they don't know endings, But I don't think that's how it should be, I mean, I do agree that weird fiction definitely has open endings, and I think that's great. That's part of its power. But that doesn't mean that the writers still don't have to work to achieve some sense of closure.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just thinking about something Stephen said. Stephen was one of my Clarion West instructors back in 2012. And I remember you talking about endings and about twist endings, and how sort of the nature of the ending you want is something that feels as if it takes you in another direction, but doesn't feel as if it comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do wonder if maybe the question about ambiguous endings, I quite like ambiguous endings, but I do still feel like I want there to be a sense of closure. Like, I want the reader to feel that whatever the central question the story was asking has still been answered to some extent, even if not all the questions within a story have been answered, or indeed if the kind of world is being set back to the state that it originally was at the beginning. But I think that some people do struggle with ambiguous endings, and some people who don't write endings well intermittently call them ambiguous endings. I find as a teacher, so somebody who looks at creative writing stories, that's a problem that does come up.
It definitely is. I think people mistake vagueness for ambiguity. I think ambiguity is necessarily it's either this or it's that. It's either the monster was real or the monster was in my head or something like that. Vagueness is there's an array of 15 possible things that this ending could be intimating, and you, the reader, have to select one, which that to me always seems like the writer is not having the nerve to commit to a single ending, and so they want to try to encompass all the possible endings, which always comes off cheap in my estimation.
One of my favorite things in recent weird fiction is John Langan's novella The Wide Carnivorous Sky, which was the title story of his second collection. And that's actually an excellent example of somebody actually pulling off a wonderful vampire story as really serious, weird fiction and core weird fiction, cosmic horror, right? So, and it's got, what you talk about, it's got intense character arcs for multiple characters that are all kind of brought to some resolution at the end. But the monster itself is never explained. And there's a wonderful section in there where one of the characters says, well, this is my theory about the monster. It's this. And it's a very plausible theory. And you're like, wow, okay, there it is. And then the next guy says, no, this is my theory. And they have like 4 different theories, all equally plausible, all mutually exclusive. And you never find out which one it is.
Yeah, John's really good at that because John is a writer who does think, like, of those 15 possibilities at the end, John runs down every one of those and figures them out really, really intensely, such that he characterizes them for us in a way that they're all real at the same time. Never mind that they can't all be real at the same time.
Yeah, he just has this masterful control of his narrative in every way. And
Yeah.
but I think there is that, you know, in certain readerships, there's that desire to have everything explained.
Mhm.
You know, and those are the people that ask questions. I mean, what's the question I saw on Facebook recently? Somebody's asking, like, in Star Trek, you know, when they do the transporter, you know, does this kill the person? I'm like, nobody was thinking of this when they wrote it. It's not a real world, you know, but for people, it becomes so real. They want everything answered.
Yeah, I almost view weird fiction as like the antithesis of science fiction, in that science fiction, like, everything is pretty much explained, or there's some science behind it, whereas weird fiction, a lot is left unexplained.
Scott, didn't you used to have, what was it, like 10 tenets of weird fiction, and one of them had to do with endings?
Yeah, it's actually was one of the first things that went up on Weird Fiction Review Online. Yeah, it was what was it called? My Dog May 2011.
Yeah. Well, what was that? It was about
you put me on the spot. Remember this horrible, controversial thing I wrote? It was just well, I mean, I'm on the site. I've got Helen's essay open. Let me look it up. But yeah, I said something. Actually, I think I cited Caitlin Kiernan in that. So here, I'll pull it up, and I can edit a little bit of this. Let's run the search engine. I mean, I think and one thing I said in there was that, I mean, and I did this as a guideline for myself, not for the whole weird. I mean, the whole world. And people got right away. The responses were like, "Oh, rules are bad. Don't tell me. I'm gonna go." People posted all these comments like, "I'm gonna go write, you know, exactly the thing you said not to write." I'm like, okay, go ahead, because he said, just do this for myself.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember everybody was so mad about it.
Yeah, it was one of the most like commented things they ever did on there.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, number one was the tale must contain no stock anthropomorphic monsters, no vampires, no zombies, no werewolves, no mummies, no ghouls. Which, of course, people still able to pull that off by doing things that function like those things, but aren't the conventional thing. But yeah, the point that you're talking about is, well, there's the last two things. So the first 5 things were like stuff you shouldn't do, or that I wasn't going to do. I was vowing not to do. And of course, it's tongue in cheek because I'm imitating Lars von Trier's, you know, Dog May 95. But 9 is leave bright lighting and CGI to the cinema. The tale must suggest more than it describes. And 10, the tale must follow Caitlin R. Kiernan's dictum. Dark fiction dealing with the inexplicable should itself present to the reader a certain inexplicability. And, you know, I think what Helen and Stephen were saying is that Caitlin said it better than anybody else. It's not about having an ending that's completely ambiguous or inexplicable or you know, worst of all, vague, but there should be something left unexplained. There should be some place left where the reader can, you know, puzzle it out.
Yeah, because if there's not, then you're pretty much just drawing a line around the story and saying it's contained on the page. But good weird fiction leaches off into the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that also weird fiction tends to have an underlying logic to it that you see the main character encountering and dismissing repeatedly, and that often the ending of weird fiction has to do with kind of coming to accept or briefly understand what that underlying logic is, but finding that it's so at odds with the logic of the real world, or the world as we tend to see it, that it I mean, I sort of like and am fascinated by this idea that once you've encountered the weird, or the thing that lies beyond reality, that the choices you have are madness or forgetting or death, I suppose.
Yeah, I think there's that Lovecraftian madness thing, you know?
Yeah. I so like it when a weird story does exactly what you're saying, Helen, and gives a character these options. How am I going to survive now? And then we don't end in the cave with the tentacles and all. We end with that person back on the street in a city trying to buy a hot dog from a vendor, and they're trying to still act like a human, but they have all this knowledge that they never wanted in the first place. And that to me that characterizes the weird I prefer anyways, is how am I going to live with this knowledge that I never really even wanted?
Yeah, and I kind of wonder if the more that I think about the way that it might relate to contemporary politics is this sense of there's been an awful lot of eruptions of various sorts, and as we come to grips with what they seem to be signaling about what lies beyond, how do we go about our daily lives, or how do we actually do something, having encountered this glimpse of something beyond the way that we thought that the world was working?
Yeah, that's the question. I think, I've been meaning to write this story. Maybe I'll write it now that I'm saying it. In the Trump era, everybody's taking so many anxiety meds that those are all washing into the sewers, and they're going to raise a race of crazy frogs. They're going to kill the world or something.
And this is the thing. What we're saying before, that could be true already.
Yeah.
I mean, the line that we have to work with keeps. We have a very narrow area that we have to work in now.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good challenge, I suppose.
Oh yeah. I think the more like the smaller the space you have to dance in, the better dance you do, I think.
Yeah. I mean, basically the Trump era has just kind of raised the bar, and the low-hanging fruit is no longer available.
Yeah.
Or it's all moved into the White House.
Yeah.
And Helen, you explicitly wrote in that intro, the essay that I've referenced, that's on Weird Fiction Review, about the sense that you had on. I forget if you were talking about after the Brexit vote or the election of Trump. I think it was Trump's election. I think because you said November, but the sense that you could actually feel the bifurcation of worlds at that point.
Yeah, that really was how I felt, in part because I think the Brexit vote took me completely by surprise. But by the time Donald Trump was actually sworn into power, we knew it was going to happen, and yet that seemed to be one of those moments at which something that had seemed completely unimaginable, 18 months before, you're watching happening, and it did seem as if we were suddenly, it was like you could see two parallel tracks and you could imagine the world on one, and you could sort of see the world moving along another. And presumably for some people that's actually quite a triumphant feeling, that there's a sense that people want it to follow one narrative, because there's always multiple narratives about, and multiple histories and multiple futures about the way that the world could go, and people are always contesting them and trying to make the one they want happen. But it just seemed like one of those moments at which you could see the gaps between multiple narratives, I suppose.
Yeah, I felt the same thing. I mean, I remember really feeling like I was waving goodbye to a bunch of me's going off to live in the Hillary Clinton world.
Yeah.
Like, you lucky bastards.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked to multiple other people that have described some similar experience,
But as we know from comic books, when worlds do diverge like that, then you get an infinite crisis and everything crashes back together.
Yeah. It almost seems as if we're headed for that already too.
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder, and I don't want to sound like I don't know, new agey or bad physics here, but the concept of the multiverse and parallel universes is not just science fiction or comic books anymore. It's legitimate physics at this point. And I wonder if the divergence at that point was not so bad. I mean, that certainly many of these timelines are running off towards imminent destruction. If the multiverse is a real thing, there are quite a few Earths that are smoking cinders already.
Mm-hmm. I think the trick with the multiverse theory is to always imagine that you're in the main one.
I think that was the feeling that we had on election night, that it's harder to feel that we're in the main one now. We're in the Berenstein Bears universe now. I mean, I think maybe there was the rift was so intense this time that maybe there was actually something we felt.
Yeah, who knows?
I mean, maybe it's more than just an emotion. Who knows?
Yeah.
Anybody else have, you know, any comment on how and this has been a big discussion on almost every episode of The Outer Dark in the last, at least the last half year, once it started to register fully. But, you know, on how this game has changed writing, has changed fiction.
Well, I think one of the things that's been interesting about it is it does dissect the notion of realism as a pure category, because realism is often taken as being a sort of stable category. But I do think that there's what we're seeing right now is Trump has sort of moved us into the territory of what we hadn't imagined was realism, and of course now it is, and in some ways these narratives, you know, resemble things that we were seeing in fiction long before it happened. So if we're moving into a space that feels more absurd, what does that mean about what's actually happening with realism? You know, does realism as a category, is it breaking down a little bit?
Yeah, post real world.
Yeah.
Or are we just seeing that it was always broken down, and maybe
that's
what we're seeing is kind of a collapse of the consensus that we were all seeing the same thing? Like, we've always been living in slightly different worlds and having different perspectives on what's happening and being affected by it in different ways.
Yes, and this is increasingly the way that I see it. You know, we see it, hardly a day goes by on social media where somebody doesn't post something by Philip Dick or J.G. Ballard or John Russ or somebody and say, look, it was prophetic, you know, Octavia Butler, they were prophetic, you know, and not just science fiction writers, but this is, and were they, or were they just saying, you know, were they seeing things that other people didn't see all the time? I mean, it's very clear. You read James Baldwin and it's like everything James Baldwin wrote is still accurate. You know, it wasn't prophetic. It was true then, and it's still true. And I think, you know, I mean, I'm like a white guy, you know, in North America. So I look at people that I know in other communities, and they always knew that, you know, they always knew there was this much racism, you know, under the surface, because it wasn't under the surface for them.
Yeah, maybe Philip K. Dick's right. Maybe there is a black castle at the center of everything, controlling us all. You know, yeah, it's scary to think. I mean, we can look at like you know, Philip K. Dick's, you know, paranoia about everything as prophetic, or we can look at it as a missed warning, something we did not heed, or we can look to this kind of stuff for answers. You know, how did these stories process through these demagogues or whatever that they were hoisting up? You know.
Yeah, I mean, Ferris Fremont looks, you know, his Paraworld Nixon or whatever is rational compared to Trump.
But I wonder about other things too, such as, you know, for example, the Me Too movement, because I find that my reaction to it has been that it's made me reconsider the world that I've been living in, and my perception of relationships that I've had with other people and situations that I've been in a way that there have been things that I have, I suppose, wanted to repress that have kind of come out of it. And I think a lot of people have ended up feeling this way, that part of what's happened when you see ways of thinking about things breaking down is you have the option to be able to see things in a different way. So some things become more clear, become more visible, and it's really scary. But it does also mean that once something's visible, you can actually start doing something about it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think we talk so much about what the Trump era or whatever. I hate to give him credit for anything, but the normalization, you know, the normalization of Nazis, for Christ's sakes. But at the same time, Me Too has denormalized something that was normal for generations.
And I think that some of the aftermath of dealing with that has had a resemblance to this kind of moment of weird fiction where, what do you deal with it? Do you go mad, or do you forget? And I think that the way in which the Me Too movement has elicited responses have in some ways kind of modeled those responses to weird fiction. you know, how do we move things back to the way that they were? How do we find a new normal? How do we deal with what's happened and what's been happening for a long time?
And that's what you pointed to, I think, in your essay, is these are the things that point to what the writer can accomplish now.
Yeah, I'm quite interested in what fiction ought to be doing for us, or what, you know, what the purpose of it is, which is not to say that it should be prescriptive, but you know, whenever I'm writing something, I'm trying to think what kind of good can I do in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I've said before, I think weird fiction is uniquely positioned, you know, because we were already familiar with the idea of an unstable reality, right? It's not, we're a little less shook than everybody else, maybe, and we have these, and at the same time, as writers, we have these tools, you know, so I think we're more prepared to land on our feet, or at least, you know, walk on this unstable ground, and we have these tools to do something about it. What can we do as writers, as editors, you know, as people in this world?
Yeah, talking about the good that your fiction can do, Helen. I liked what you said in your introduction there about how fiction, or weird fiction, can make us other ourselves, kind of. And I may be paraphrasing you unfairly, but it felt like you were suggesting I don't know, who was it, Copernicus, who showed us that we weren't the center of the swirling planets, you know, and then Darwin shows us we're not at the top of the food chain, and then Freud tells us we're not the boss of our own minds. Weird fiction can tell us we're not even who or what we think we are, and that does kind of sensitize us to others and give them more personhood than we might have before, which I think is a wonderful thing that fiction can do. All fiction can do, but weird fiction maybe especially.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that weird fiction does help us to see the possibility of ourselves as other than we are, and to kind of it deconstructs some of the categories by which we form our identities. And I mean, in the best cases, I hope that that does make us able to see ourselves and other people in different ways.
Yeah.
The trick is that's got to be like a byproduct of the story. Like you say, fiction can't be descriptive. We're not given a prescription to the world and saying, take this, you'll feel better. We're telling stories that are hopefully entertaining and hooky, and this like narrative other training is smuggled in.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that really good fiction often does both things at once, because, you know, when I think about reading a really good book, there's a part of it that kind of comes away, there's a stickiness to it that comes away with me afterwards and sort of infects the way that I see the world afterwards. And I think being introduced to a weird world, or being able to see the world as slightly weirded, I mean, sometimes it's scary, and we're seeing some of that come up with Trump and with Brexit, but there's also, you know, the possibility that we then be able to see, to disintegrate this category of the normal that I think can really hurt people from time to time.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, the normal definitely isn't healthy for everybody. Who are some of the writers that you have seen, writers or editors, other people that have been doing things that, particularly over the past year or two, and David, you can probably especially speak to this, you know, you've seen that have been doing things that have changed things.
By things, do you mean like weird fiction?
Yeah, and you know, have opened up new approaches, I guess.
That's a good question. I don't know that necessarily anybody that I could think of off the top of my head. One of the events I really liked last year was Necronomicon, and one of my favorite panels was the panel on Thomas Ligotti. I especially enjoyed that because I think, especially in 2017, absurdity was sort of like a big word on my mind, because it seemed like the things that were going on just seemed absurd. And I felt like Ligotti's fiction really spoke to that absurdity, I guess, a lot.
Yeah, I think every 2 years, so this is the third Necronomicon now, and I think it had that event alone has changed weird fiction each time it's happened. I think there's just this intense cross-pollination that occurs every time we do it.
Yeah, I felt like there were a lot of people at Necronomicon this past year, a lot of new faces. I feel like every time there's a Necronomicon, it sort of expands the borders of weird fiction. Like we draw this bigger crowd of people that maybe weren't considered weird fiction in the past and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like an Area X that keeps expanding.
Yeah.
I mean, I talk about going to the first one and the people I hung out. I remember going to the big ball or whatever,
Huh.
and the people I was standing in the corner. There were 3 people that I was meeting in person for the first time that I hung out with that night, and they were Justin Steele, Sam Cowan, and Anya Martin. And I met all those people for the first time that night. And look how important all those people have turned out to be in the field and in my life since then.
Yeah.
But I mean, Justin was the only one who really was known at all at that point. Well, Anya had some reputation, I think, in conventional horror. And Justin and Sam have both done a great deal with publishing, and Anya. I know Anya hasn't announced it yet, but she just sold her first collection the last couple of days to Lethe.
You're asking how's the game, or who has changed the game. I think John Langan's The Fisherman, the way it kind of dominated in so many horror categories, has made weird fiction. I don't know. It gave it to me more. I don't know, more notoriety or something. It made it something more writers could aim for. I think if we count The Fisherman as weird fiction.
I think I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. And I like the way it won all the horror categories. That was pretty cool.
I think that there's been some quite interesting women writing who have intersected with literary categories. So Kamila Grudova, who I was talking about a huge amount last time I was chatting with you.
I was hoping you'd bring her back up.
I think her work is amazing, and she's come out through Fitzcarraldo editions, but she had a story published in Granta. But also like Carmen Machado, who's collection has been getting rave reviews and she's been up for all sorts of major awards. I think both of them are doing interesting things around body horror and intersections with the weird.
And I think, didn't she have 2 stories in Year's Best Weird Fiction too?
I think she did, yeah.
I think she's the only writer that's had 2 stories in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And deservedly, yeah. So she's definitely, we've laid our claim to her already, but yeah, she's. I mean, both John and Carmen, as you said, have brought the weird, to a wider attention over the last couple of years. And Camille Grudava is someone who is, I don't think. I mean, have you interacted with her personally as an editor, because you published your story?
I didn't as an editor, but in fact she did a launch here late last year, and I was able to go out to it and meet her.
Oh, you met her?
I did meet her.
She's a real person, right?
Because we were before that point, we actually weren't sure if she was a real person. There was something, I don't know, maybe it was because she said she was from Canada, and that seemed like an innocuous place to claim you were from. Yeah. So no, because I hadn't interacted with her at all around the publishing of the year's best weird fiction, there was a part of me that had begun to believe that maybe she didn't exist. But I did see her, and in fact, she does exist.
And she wasn't like wearing a hat and dark glasses like JT Leroy or whatever, right?
She wasn't. I don't think she had ever done an event before. I mean, she's a writer who really just feels as if she's come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And her voice is so distinctive, but has a quality that reminds me a little bit of Ligotti, but with different sorts of influences thrown in there.
Yeah, I mean, a very powerful writer, and that's why I was juxtaposing her to, say, Carmen or John. I mean, John is obviously someone who's been conscious of the weird, although, and some of his work is certainly in that area, and some of it is definitely not. But he's been, conscious of it all along. I talk about, I always refer to the Beatles of contemporary weird fiction, which is John Paul Laird and Stephen Graham Jones. But you know, none of those people, Stephen, you included, write exclusively weird. Not even Laird, and Laird is kind of diverging more. And Paul Tremblay obviously goes in and out of the weird, but is not writing it either. So, but all people who are very conscious of it and have had an important influence, and have, you know, also been very supportive of, you know, other writers coming up like myself, and I think, you know, are like the large oaks that clear space for other trees. But so John is very conscious of the weird. Carmen, I think, is certainly conscious of it, even if she's not deliberately working in that tradition, quote unquote. But Camille is somebody who is writing it, and apparently, you know, I see no sense that she's part of the weird community before, but she's coming out and writing work, and the weird community reaches out to her. You know, and so we sort of, that's another way that Area X enlarges its territory. I mean, I think also of a writer like Michael Wehan, who, you know, when I first met him, is like, I don't know if, you know, I don't know what weird is, or, but, you know, the weird writers and weird readers had picked up on his work from the first few stories he published, and, you know, more and more he, you know, became conscious of it and started writing it. I mean, I had this conversation yesterday with Daniel Brown, you know, I interviewed for the show too. And I think more and more as the weird grows, it sort of reaches out and contaminates new writers. I guess that's the process I'm talking about.
Yeah. I also feel like we see weird fiction spreading into other forms of media, not just written. We're seeing movies like Annihilation and television shows like Dark, Black Mirror, and the upcoming Lovecraft Country.
Yeah, and I'm, you know, I confess because I don't watch TV, and there's a variety of technological and time management reasons why I don't, but I'm behind on that. I really need to watch, you know, Black Mirror and some of these other things if I'm going to keep up with the medium.
I was going to say video games too. What Remains of Edith Finch came out maybe last year, and that has a huge weird influence, down to the fact that if you wander around that space, all of the books on the bookshelves, most of them are weird fiction books.
Really?
Yeah.
And podcast land too. The Welcome to Night Vale, right? And also there's it's even shown up on the Disney Channel with Gravity Falls, I think it's called, which is really good. It's really weird too.
And Tanis, that actually sponsored us for a while.
Oh.
And I think their follow-up was called Rabbits, and it's deeply weird stuff. Yeah.
There's some sort of Lovecraft cartoon as well that I saw on Netflix when I was hanging out with my niece and nephew.
Wow. I wonder if in like 15 years we'll all look back and say we were weird writers in 2017. Now we're this other kind of writer. Like the same way people like splatterpunk was a little bubble in the 90s. You know, I wonder if weird fiction will be a bubble as well.
David, what do you think? Would you think you'd be changing the name of the Weird Fiction Review or something?
I hope not.
The dubstep review.
I mean, I think it wouldn't surprise me if that happened, because these things do tend to go in waves, don't they? And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if everybody's flocking to weird fiction right now, and then some portion of that will move on to whatever the next thing is. But I think weird fiction as generating this certain kind of emotion, you know, the reason that people come to it from all sorts of different backgrounds is I think because there's some aspect of it that's quite difficult to codify and to set out to do, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree. You stumble into weird fiction more than you do it intentionally. Or that's the way it is for me anyways.
Yeah, me too.
I kind of set out to do it intentionally, although when I returned to fiction about 10 years ago, the first stories I was writing I was only intending them as horror. But I had a long critical interest in weird and noir, going back a long, long time. So at some point I decided, yeah, I want to specifically, I mean, I'm doing it because there's certain things I want to explore. And right now that works for me to explore those, but I might, you know, decide to explore other things later. but I think I'm weird in that way. I mean, I'm just making this conscious decision that I want to mine, and I'm working. You know, what I'm doing is I don't, you know, exemplary what anything else is doing, but I just trying to look at particular effects and things that I want to do in weird fiction. But that's just me. I mean, but that's the cool thing. There's just so many people now. And, you know, like that panel that we were on a few years ago, and Nathan brought up the point, well, there's always been people doing weird. You know, Fritz Leiber was doing it in the 70s.
Yeah.
Well, there have, but I think around the turn of the last century, there was this explosion, and there's just more people by far doing it, and doing it well, than there ever have been. I mean, David, don't you see this?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, do you think, I mean, obviously the internet was still in its infancy 20 years ago, but do you think, you know, you could have even done a thing like Weird Fiction Review 20 years ago? At what point do you think something like that became possible?
Yeah, I definitely think the internet helped. I think actually one of the big things that helped weird fiction was the entry of works by Lovecraft and other weird fiction writers around the 20th century into the public domain. I think that's been a huge help.
Well, they entered the public domain, and they became canonical too, you know? I mean, the Library of America, and the same thing has happened for noir.
Yeah.
So these aren't considered, I mean, they've lost, they've acquired a mainstream prestige. I'm not pastiche, I mean panache. Sorry. Lovecraft's got plenty of prestige.
That's neat. I think that's neat that the weird community kind of came together around the time the internet was going wide. So it's like the internet spread its tentacles out and embraced a whole community and allowed people who were the only weird person in their town to realize they're not the only weird person in the world. And that does kind of give a movement or a genre or a mode or whatever it is more momentum, I think.
Yeah, I think I can't see it happening without that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to see how geography plays into things because, you know, I'm based over here in the UK, and I think our weird fiction scene looks probably quite different to the weird fiction scene in America right now. Over here, I think there's the intersections with nature writing are, for example, maybe much stronger and have had a longer tradition. Yeah, I think so.
That's real. Okay, now talk more about that, please.
Yeah, I think there's writers such as Gary Budden who are combining psychogeography and nature writing with weird fiction. I mean, landscape plays a huge role in the weird in lots of different traditions. But I do think that there's, at the moment over here in the UK, there's been a huge uptick in the importance of nature writing. I think it's gained a lot of momentum in part because of a completely non-weird text, H is for Hawk, which was published by Helen MacDonald a couple of years ago, that has just made the mainstream writers and readers more interested in nature writing. But I think a lot of that has come to intersect with the weird. So for example, Robert McFarlane, who does a lot of very influential nature writing over here, I think he blurbed Jeff Vandermeer, and he's blurbed also M. John Harrison. So there's a sort of connection of environmentally interested weird fiction over here. That's some of that is coming out through nature writing and psychogeography.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that is. That is.
You know, there's a whole, there's a phrase that's been coined, I don't know, close to 10 years ago that has currency completely outside our community, or not completely, but very little overlap, called global weirding. You know, which is some, you know, people talk about, I think, was it Trump said, oh, they're calling it climate change instead of global warming, but global weirding has also gained a lot of traction. And there was a whole book, I think it was an issue of the journal Paradoxa a few years ago, and Jeff Vandermeer is in it. I think China Mieville is in it, and it's called Global Weirding, and it, some of it looks at those literary intersections, and some of it looks at the climate issues, and some of it looks at writers that we don't normally think of as weird. And then there's that whole, I mean, there's the whole the main intersection that I see, you know, where Helen's talking about, you mentioned Jeff, is Jeff Vandermeer and the philosopher ecologist Timothy Morton, who wrote Hyperobjects. And Jeff and Timothy have done a lot of stuff together already, and you know they've interacted their work quite a bit. David, didn't you have something on the Weird Fiction Review that was it there, or you've linked to it
regarding
Timothy Morton? They did a thing where they interviewed each other, but that wasn't on your site, was it? You know,
it
what
might have been. I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, I think it's online, or at least part of it's online. It's really fascinating. And Timothy Morton is part of the whole the non-human turn, you know, object-oriented ontology and speculative realism. And there you have philosophers like Eugene Thacker and Graham Harman, who have specifically written about horror and weird fiction and Lovecraft. I mean, Harman has written extensively on Lovecraft. And these are leading people and then there's Riza Nagarastani, you know, who you do have up, you know, who wrote Cyclonopedia. And he's actually from that object-oriented ontology movement, philosopher who's written a deeply weird novel. I mean, it makes Pynchon look like Dr. Seuss. Although Dr. Seuss can be pretty fucking weird.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I checked on the conversation between Morton and Vandermeer. It was on LA Review of Books.
Okay, that's where it is. Yeah, it's really good.
Cool.
But so there's that dialogue, and I know Jeff at the end of the first of Annihilation, which, you know, the movie is imminent right now, right? And at the end, he talks about his influences, and I can't think of the poet, but the main influence was a nature poet. And he had such frustration in all the interviews, and everybody compared him to Lovecraft and Tarkovsky.
Man,
Yeah, did anybody read Martin McInnes's Infinite Ground? I think Jeff blurbed that, and that was deeply, deeply strange detective novel that definitely had the influence of Borges, and it has this very strange landscape. Sort of half of it takes place in the jungle, and half of it takes place in a city, but it has that shifting reality to it. It's anyway, I recommend it. So that's Infinite Ground by Martin McInnes.
Interesting.
Oh man, that's neat. You bring up Borges too. I wonder why the weird community has not tried to co-opt him, because I think I mean, he was doing weirder stuff than Lovecraft, as far as I can tell.
I think some of us have. I think. I mean, go ahead, David. You have.
I was going to say, I mean, like, he's featured in The Weird, which is sort of the inspiration for Weird Fiction Review, and I've always thought of him as being part of the weird fiction movement. Although I guess there is some disagreement about, you know, some people consider him to be magical realism or what have you.
Although he actually predates that. I mean, he edited that anthology with a couple other guys, and I have it on. Right, it's right behind me, and that was really that anthology, which has different names in different languages, and I think even in Spanish a couple different names. But it's this anthology of fantastic stories that was, in a large part, was the impetus for magical realism. It kind of grew out of the aesthetic that Borges projected with that. Yeah,
he even has a story dedicated to Lovecraft. I don't know if you guys knew that.
I didn't know that. Borges did?
I can't remember the name, but there is one story he has dedicated to Lovecraft.
Oh, now I've got the complete stories on the shelf there. I got to pick it down. But I think the Vandermeers did a really important thing, a very simple and elegant thing. And I've said it before, when they did the Weird Anthology, is they included the familiar pulp tradition, you know, that a lot of people think of when they think of the weird, that runs through Lovecraft and Weird Tales, you know, in the Farnsworth Wright era. But they also included this thread that is primarily European, that runs from Kuban and Schultz and Kafka and then, you know, Borges. And they put those two things together. And as soon as they did, I mean, if you can see it, you can't unsee it anymore. And that I think enlarged, certainly for me, my understanding of the weird. I think at some level I always read those writers, and I felt some of the same things I felt reading Lovecraft or Ligotti. Certainly Ligotti. I mean, Ligotti was certainly reading them, right?
Yeah.
And I think that did change the landscape then. And it may be a way that's prepared us to deal with the realities or unrealities that we're dealing with now.
Yeah, I think translated fiction is is great. And David, you were talking about translating fiction right now. Are there other works that are being translated right now that you're finding really interesting, or other writers from other countries that you maybe want to point towards?
Yeah, for sure. One book that came out last year was a new translation of The King and the Golden Mask. That was really good. Scott Nicolay actually has a collection that I'm looking forward to by Jean Ray that's being translated.
Yeah, actually, I can just now finally announce that formally.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
the first Jean Ray book, and hopefully a number of others to follow.
I'm so excited now. So I still love the homonym that John Ray writes genre. That makes me so happy.
Yeah, I'm actually hoping there's more perhaps weird fiction out there that's just not hasn't been discovered, that it will hopefully be translated into English in the future. I mean, there's not much available, for example, from Franz Helens.
Yeah, and so where are we going to see some of your work with that?
So there's one story up right now on Weird Fiction Review. I'm hoping to translate more. It's great because a lot of it is public domain. It just hasn't been translated yet.
Interesting.
You know what I think would be interesting to do would be to take a I don't know, one of Ramsey Campbell's like weird stories or something and reduce it to a certain set of markers, and then see if those markers express in a Raymond Carver story or something. Because Raymond Carver stuff unsettles me in the same way that weird fiction does sometimes, and I wonder if it's using the same dynamic. It's just not using the cartoonish tentacle monsters and stuff, you know?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is an interesting idea. I mean, one thing I've always wanted to do is retranslate Poe back into English from Mallarmé's translations.
Oh, neat.
And I've actually, it's something I wanted to do for a long time, but you know, part of the problem is it's hard to get. You sometimes, like, certainly you can't do the Raven because you know it so well. You know, there's no way you can avoid the same word choices, so you have to choose less well-known poems.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting if you can put something, if there's a way to break something down to basic codes and then bring it back. I guess that transporter idea.
Yeah, that's what I'm always interested in more than. I mean, when I get interested in that kind of stuff, then I feel the pressure to construct a big taxonomy where everything is connected to everything, and then it blows up, and I have to go do something else, you know.
Yeah. So, what other sorts of stuff gives you that kind of feeling, that kind of weird feeling?
Yeah, exactly.
I've learned to hunt for that. I mean, that's what I do with, you know, the stories from the Borderland thing that I do, and that's what I'm saying about what the Vandermeers did with the weird, is because as soon as they juxtaposed those writers, I realized that yes, they always made me feel this way, and which is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And now, I mean, I scour particularly short fiction by mainstream writers, and I'm looking, you know, where are weird stories that no one would think of weird stories because they don't have a monster or they don't deal with the tropes that we expect. And there are lots of them. And especially I'm interested in stories that come so close to the weird but have no explicit supernatural elements. Like I did this essay on Virginia Woolf's Solid Objects. I think that's an excellent example. It's a deeply weird story. I mean, it even has this language about a object that might be a meteor from the dead husk of a planet or something. You know,
Nice.
I mean, she goes into full weird language in a couple spots, and yeah.
You know, and for, I guess, Helen, what you're asking, what gives you that same weird emotion, feeling, whatever it is, and it's not always narrative for me. I guess sometimes on social media, like a distant aunt that I forgot, was around or something, will post a picture of me from when I was 4 years old and say, "Hey, you remember this?" And I'll look at it and I'll say, "No, I don't remember that." And I get that same weird feeling, you know, like, did this really happen? Am I really me? What's going on?
Yeah, because Lovecraft does talk about time and about how time has this kind of odd or weird quality to it. And I wonder if you're kind of picking up on some of that, because there is something about seeing old photographs of yourself that make you realize that you're, I don't know, embedded in the past, or that you have this history, or that you were another person who you aren't now.
Yeah, and you have to. Do I claim this as part of me, or do I say this is made up, or is it smuggled in from another reality, or what's going on? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's increasingly an experience that people are having, and I think we are starting to see folks try to deal with that in weird fiction. The idea that our memories don't match up anymore.
Yeah, the Mandela effect, man.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I referenced the Berenstain Bears earlier, but that seems to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, people are adding more and more things to the Mandela effect. You know, first it was Mandela and the Berenstain Bears and Shazam.
Yeah, I had that Shazam one. I went.
Oh.
I lost about an evening to reading up on this and trying to legitimize my Shazam memories.
I mean, where I ran across it and where I first wrote about it was writing an essay about an Avram Davidson story for Stories from the Borderland, which is a story called "And All the Seas with Oysters," and it's this story that there's these creatures that mimic like our objects. So the like the egg form looks like a safety pin. I have to stop and say it. A safety pin. Then they grow into a coat hanger, and then they become a bicycle. And it's this wonderful, it's this incredible story. It's just a really masterful short story. And I think it won a World Fantasy Award. I know it was nominated. But in my so when I dug this story out to write this essay, in my memory, it was paper clips, coat hangers, bicycles. It's not. It's safety pins, coat hangers, bicycles. But if I go online, I can find other people that say paper clips too. And I mean, I even had to stop myself just now, even though I've reread this story in the last couple of years multiple times. And the whole safety pin thing ties into the theme of the story about fertility, because it starts with a mother asking for a safety pin and the guy in the bike shop, wondering why there's no safety pins. Sometimes there's like lots of safety pins and there's no safety pins. But I read that story in the 70s, and all my life I thought it was paper clips.
Yeah.
So that's my Berenstain, but not one of the more common things.
Not
as common as Shazam, but I think more things are accumulating like that.
Yeah, but at the same time, I bet we all have different memories of Flann O'Brien's The Third Policeman, just because it's so crazy. We can't contain it in a single narrative, so we pick and choose this paperclip, that bicycle, or whatever to invest in and characterize it. Of course, I think sometimes reality is unstable, and that's the reason we remember things differently. But sometimes it's something else. Maybe, I don't know.
That's my interest. I mean, people talk about the unstable narrator, and I say and I'm interested in the unstable reality.
Yeah.
I think that's at the core of weird fiction.
Yeah.
David, are there any other trends that you see? These large-scale trends?
I think we covered the biggest ones that I can remember, or that I can think of. I'm trying to think if there are others.
Well, let's look ahead, since we're calling this the 2018. What are some of the works? I mean, obviously, we're all looking, I think, towards Annihilation. I'm very excited about it. My local theater has a poster up for it.
Nice.
I was lucky enough to see They Remain early on, which is fantastic. But what are the other, besides movies, what other movies or books or video games are people looking forward to in the weird?
That movie Hereditary coming out, it may have a touch of the weird to it. I don't know.
Has everybody seen the trailer for that?
Yeah, I've seen it.
It made me think of the Aikman story, The Inner Room.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that may be just me.
I haven't seen it. What is it about?
We're not sure. Maybe it's a house.
What the fuck is it about? I don't know.
It's a house and a family, and maybe something is passed down through this family line, but who knows what it is? I don't know.
Yeah, it definitely looks pretty dynamic, but
yeah, it does.
What I know, David, you had a list of some of the writers you were looking forward to. I've mentioned Michael Wehunt, but there are a number of others that have collections coming out soon.
Oh yeah, so one of my favorites that I just read was by Priya Sharma. She's a UK writer, and she sort of fits in that trend that Helen mentioned about the sort of nature and the environment. She has a lot of stories that deal with that, and she's a doctor by day, so that kind of fits in, I guess, with her profession.
Yeah, and Undertow is going to publish her collection, right?
Yeah, Undertow. It's from Undertow.
That's a guaranteed stamp of quality.
Yeah, one of the stories actually just won the British Fantasy Award, I think in 2017 or 2016. It's up on tour. It's called Fabulous Beast.
What other? I know John Langan has a new collection coming out.
I think Simon Francis has a new collection coming out, which I'm quite looking forward to.
Oh yeah, I think he told me about that, and I think Nathan Ballingrud does too.
Yep.
Nina Allen has a new novel called The Dollmaker, which I think is coming out in, maybe it's early 2019, but looking ahead, I've just had a chance to read a draft of it, and it's phenomenal. I'm really looking forward to that. It's got a bunch of embedded short stories within a wider frame narrative, and Nina Allen's short fiction, which is both, she does science fiction and she does weird fiction and horror, definitely worth checking out.
She's wonderful, yeah.
Anybody else? Baron has a new novel coming out too.
Yeah, it's crime thriller, right?
Yeah, I see some people have already got arcs of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and I think there was he had posted something, I don't know, somebody or other criticized him and said he was abandoning the weird or something, and you know, he posted that. I mean, it's a stupid thing to say, for one thing, because you know, who is writing, unless the, you know, we can look at the people that just write Lovecraft pastiche, which I don't think is weird fiction anymore. I mean, that's a really good example of, I think, where the tropes have, you know, the form has moved on beyond the tropes, and if you're still writing the same stuff, it's not weird. But he was criticized for that, and he made the point that everything he writes is going to always deal with the same fundamental aspects of reality that were in his weird fiction that made it weird. I can't see how he wouldn't.
Yeah, definitely. Paul Tremblay has The Cabin at the End of the World.
Oh yeah,
which is pretty good. Yeah, it's you know, it's like Head Full of Ghosts and Disappearance at the Devil's Rock were more horror, and I would say Cabin at the End of the World veers more weird, possibly.
Have you read the whole thing?
Yeah.
You lucky dog. I heard him read, I think, like the beginning chapter at Necronomicon. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
It was weird. It was definitely weird and disturbing, and and like, where is this going? So yeah, I'm very excited about that. I'll put together like what I've done in the Outer Dark, or I've posted on the Outer Dark Facebook page in the past. They have the Hive Mind, you know, recommend all the collections and novels that are coming out, and in the last couple of years there's been at least 40 each.
Wow. I
mean, it's we think of obvious names, you know, people that have won awards and have, you know, become established in the genre, like Strancis and Baron and Tremblay and Langan and Nina Allen, but there are a lot of people coming out, and some of those will be breakouts too.
Yeah, keep an eye out for Alia Whiteley's new, I think it's a novella. She's done a series of novellas through Unsung Stories here in the UK, and Unsung have done a bunch of weird text. Most of what they've done is kind of been either novels or novellas. They did one collection last year called You Will Grow Into Them by Malcolm Devlin, which had a bunch of weird stories in it. But Alia Whiteley's new novella, all of her work has had really interesting, weird qualities to it, and she's a fantastic writer.
Exciting. You always have someone that I want to jump on, you know, and their work. I want to get their work as quickly as possible, because, you know, the Camille Grodava pick was inspired.
Yeah, well, her writing really jumped out to me, and when it's one of those collections that you read and just it just blows you away. I think I spent the last year going around and telling everybody I met, go read Camilla Grodova.
Do you ever feel like John the Baptist sometimes, you know, telling people about one of these great writers?
Yeah, well, it's great to find somebody, particularly somebody who really does feel as if they're coming out of nowhere and that your friends haven't read yet. You know, it's not going around and telling people to read somebody that they've already encountered. It's saying, you know, this person's really extraordinary, and I think you'll love their work.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, you know, on the Outer Dark, I ask people to recommend at the end a couple of writers, and sometimes people recommend, you know, fairly obvious people. Peter Straub, okay, I mean, which is great, but I'm always excited when someone says somebody that no one has mentioned before. and that's great, which you have done. David, what's coming up at Weird Fiction Review that you can reveal that's not top secret still?
That's a good question. So there,
if you say something and then you find out that you can't say it, I can edit it before the final.
Okay. So there was a couple Penguin classics that came out last year that we're reviewing. One was just posted, I think, last week, or yeah, this past week. It was Ice by Anna Kavan.
Oh, yeah.
And then also there was a collection of tales from Shirley Jackson called Dark Tales that was put together by Penguin Classics that was released last year in the U.S.
You know, we haven't mentioned her up till now, but you know, when we talk about writers that certainly have done some weird fiction who have become canonical, I think Shirley Jackson has achieved more canonical status just in the last 10 years than any of these people we're talking about.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, she always had a foot in the mainstream, but she's increasingly just recognized at all levels, as she deserves, as a major, you know, writer from the 20th century.
Yeah, and she has influence too. Like there's a way to read Jeff's Annihilation, where it's pretty much the haunting of Hill House, you know?
Ooh. I mean, I always thought that about The Shining. The Shining is the haunting of Hill House plus the Beckoning Fair one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Paul Tremblay does a lot with We've Always Lived in the Castle too, doesn't he?
Yes. Good point. See, I mean, her work is deeply embedded already in a lot of people's work, and I think it's reaching a much larger audience now, which it really deserves. I think we're seeing something, but not quite as much, with Angela Carter too.
Yeah, I wonder if we give that time. I've just picked up the biography that came out for her. I think I got it at Christmas, so it must have come out just at the end of 2017. But I wonder if that kind of work is going to see people returning to her stories.
That's what I wonder. I mean, I'll make a prediction, like in 5 to 10 years, you know, she'll be on that scale too.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of people who are working on or beginning PhDs around her work. So, I mean, not that necessarily means that writers will follow. I mean, writers are kind of already there. I think there are lots of writers who are very interested in Angela Carter and who've taken inspiration from her style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, what happens in academia is often hidden from the public, but it has a huge influence because it shapes the way we see these writers, and it brings out, I mean, look at Melville was forgotten until, you know, critics, you know, rediscovered Moby Dick, and they framed it for a way that people could see its importance, and that happened.
Yeah, and I think Angela Carter's career is quite interesting because I think she hit a level of success right after she passed away, and some of that had to do with people stepping forward to kind of claim her at that point.
That's a good point. Yeah, and it's, I mean, that posthumous success can take many turns.
Yeah.
The routes to posthumous success are as various as the routes to success in your life. As much as we'd all like to achieve the success in our lifetimes, but posthumous success doesn't follow a single path either.
Yeah.
Are there any other things that you know, from the past year that really leap out that we haven't talked about, or from the year that's coming? We can talk about both. No?
I wonder if, you know, we were talking about what's coming for weird fiction. I wonder if weird fiction will find a way to express our anxieties about artificial intelligence or something, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Nick Harkaway's novel Gnomon, which is a massive whopper of a novel. It's huge. But to me, some of Nick Harkaway's stuff has qualities of the weird in that it's nominally science fiction, but it's really zany inside. And Gnomon has a lot to do with artificial intelligence and ideas of surveillance states, but not in the way that traditionally that narrative traditionally takes.
I haven't read him. Now I have to.
Yeah, I wonder if, like, if a narrative leaves us unsettled and feeling weird, if that means it's weird fiction, you know?
That's a really good question.
Yeah. I don't know.
And we talked about how some of these writers that weren't initially recognized as weird, you know, like Borges, but we can see that he was in every way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another work that is special this year is Frankenstein. This is the 200th anniversary of when it was published for the first time. And that also kind of relates, I think, to artificial intelligence because, you know, we're sort of creating, or we might be able to, at some point in the future, create a human consciousness, perhaps, using artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, there's a work that has just continued to come back and resonate over and over and over again. And I think certainly, I don't know. Do you think Frankenstein can be? I wouldn't say it is a weird novel, or I wouldn't reduce it to that. Not that I see the weird as reductive. It's so many things, but I certainly think, you know, it has appealed to the weird reader.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of feel like it's one of those things that has entered the mainstream, so it's no longer weird like zombies or, you know, vampires. But I think maybe for the first time, if you had read it and not known anything about it, you might have considered it weird.
Well, I think, you know, where it's different from, I mean, we think of Frankenstein together with zombies and vampires and werewolves because we think of the universal monsters, right? I mean, Frankenstein belongs to that era as a cultural thing. But the reason that, you know, when I wrote that Dogma in 2011, when I said, don't, you know, for me, I'm not going to write about werewolves and vampires and things like that, is because those things are embedded in religious mythologies. You know, I mean, they're essentially like the vampire, particularly, is entirely in the Western world. It's a Christian concept. So if you're validating vampires with all the trappings of crosses and garlic and stuff, you're basically saying that, okay, this is a world where Christianity is operating and it, you know, it functions and has power, and which I'm not saying, I'm not disputing. I'm talking about fictional worlds, not our world. You know, nobody get offended. I'm not attacking Christmas or anything right now. But so if you use those, you're using a trope of Christianity. It's the same as like having a vampire novel, the same as having Jesus walking around, as far as I'm concerned. And that's not weird because that's a world where everything has rules and it's explained. And the same is pretty much true with you know, werewolves and zombies, etc. But Frankenstein is not. I mean, Frankenstein is this product of what for its time would have been super science, just the way that Laird Barron deals with, you know, super science, you know, becoming weird. So I think it still has that potential to be read as weird. And certainly, as you point out, David, it resonates with, you know, our fear of the singularity and what that means.
Yeah.
And this is the big celebration year for Frankenstein. So yeah, we're seeing it all over. It's a good time for people to re-engage or engage with it. Anything else? Have we created a horrible monster with the weird we can no longer control?
Hopefully, that's the idea,
right? That's it. Yeah, I mean, that's it. We want to create something that will go off on, you know, will continue to move on its own and do things we can't predict.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming on, for being part of this year's roundtable.
Thanks for having me. It was good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I'll just add a note here I didn't want to bring attention to at the beginning, but we had hoped to have a fourth member, Sonia Tafe, and tech problems made it impossible to get her on. So that was unfortunate. Hope to have her on maybe in a future episode. She's a wonderful writer and a very astute critic and poet as well.
Maybe
so
maybe it was weird tech problems, man.
Yeah, really. The singularity is intruding. I feel, I mean, this is a whole other topic of conversation, but I feel that, you know, well, if you've read Hyperobjects, basically, you know, things like global warming or the singularity potentially violate cause and effect because they're violate causality because they're having effects on us now, even though it's a thing from the future. Like their tentacles extend into our time.
Yeah.
So perhaps the singularity was trying to take out Sonia.
Possibly, man. Possibly.
Yeah. I hope she's all right. I hope robots aren't gathering around her house. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, and panelists and readers. Look forward to another weird year. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. That was a good time, man.
Yeah, it was fun. I really feel bad about. I know that Sonia's out there feeling terrible too, but
Yeah.
what a bummer. Oh
Yeah.
well.
All right, I'm gonna go eat some food, man.
Yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
again. Thanks for your patience with the scheduling and with the late start.
No
Appreciate it.
problem. Thank you for putting this together.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
And I
great.
hope to have it. I'm going to put Daniel Brown up this week, and I hope to do this one the week after. I'm still trying to find an artist to do a poster for it, like I've done the last couple of years.
Cool.
Cool.
So that's why I asked for photos.
Yeah, I need to do that. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Have a great day.
Y'all
Take
too.
care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.